tomorrow to bring the casket of the former president to Washington, D.C., where he will lie in state in the Capitol Rotunda tomorrow evening until Wednesday. Then he will be laid to rest back home in Texas. It all comes as tributes continue to pour in for the late president and war hero. Here is George H.W. Bush's former vice president, Dan Quayle, a short time ago on Sunday Morning Futures with Maria Bartiromo.
George Bush was just absolutely the best. He was a great individual, in my opinion, a great president. He loved his family. He loved his work. He loved the country. And it was such an honor for me to work with him every single day that he was president, I was vice president, for the American people.
William LaJeunesse is live from College Station, Texas, home to the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library. William?
Well, Arthel, you know, this is also home to Texas A&M University, which is huge, second largest campus in the country, and also the Bush School of Public Policy. Well, last night we have some video for you. About 150 students and residents gathered around a pond right behind the library that I'm at right now. They sang Amazing Grace, God Bless America, and the Navy song Anchors Aweigh. They placed candles, personal notes, flowers, poinsettias, and roses around a bronze statue of a much younger and vigorous President Bush. The flags here and in Houston flying at half staff again today. While President Bush was not overly concerned with his legacy, those here, they spoke of his accomplishments, and they thought it was important to pay homage to the 41st Commander-in-Chief.
I wanted to swing by just to pay my respects. This family is just dearly beloved by the community, and I have such high regard for who he was as a man and the way he loved his family, even above the way he loved his country.
I feel honored to be a part of the Bush School and a small piece, very small, of George Bush's legacy. If you look at the flag in the PCC, it says duty, honor, country, and I think that really just sums it up.
So the president will be laid to rest here behind the library in a private ceremony on Thursday, beside, of course, his wife Barbara and their first child, Robin, who died of leukemia at age 3 in 1953. Secret Service has already closed that burial site, so we can't go there now. There'll be no classes here on Thursday as friends and family say their final goodbye.
I think he was proud of his political career. It's not a question I ever asked him. I know I heard him say that one of the things he was most proud of was his children came home, his family. And I think and that maybe was one of the things he was most proud of, in the fact that he was the husband of Barbara Bush, the woman he loved for 73 years. But he wasn't the kind of man who would brag about his accomplishments.
So what President Bush stood for means different things to different people, right, you guys? So we have heard over the last 36, 48 hours so many different stories about him, and everyone internalizes that differently. But for some of the students here attending the School of Public Policy, say they want to carry on in his tradition of public service. Arthel and Eric, back to you.
Very nice. William LaJeunesse. Thank you, William. Eric?
And Arthel, for more on the late president's life and legacy, we are joined by Kurt Smith. He's a former speechwriter to President George H.W. Bush. Kurt, welcome. Amid the accolades and the remembrances about his graciousness, his generosity, his consideration, and his fierce competitiveness and love of country and service, what was he like to work for?
Well, he was extraordinarily gracious, kind, a great patriot, extraordinarily scholarly, with a marvelous resume. He knew the world, he knew the country, he knew how the nation fit into the world, and a great thing. But he did have, and he knew where he wanted his speeches to go, and so he was very easy to work with in that sense. Never rude, never mean, hated the flim-flam, the phony baloney quality of politics, the viciousness which has enveloped politics today. It was far less so when he was president, and I think many people would frankly love the fact or the possibility that someone like him could be president today.
Yeah, how do we get back to that?
That they would like.
How do we get back to that tone in this country, if possible?
Well, it takes two to tango. And I'm not sure that there are many political leaders in the United States with the capacity to be another Bush or even the wish to be another Bush. George Bush was one of a kind. He was a Tom Mix versus by way of Andy Hardy and Walter Mitty. He had a spectacular life. He was really the all-American kid who lived the all-American life. I mean, think of it. He was a war hero. He was 17 when Pearl Harbor happened. He wanted to register, went down to the office, and the war draft board said, "Sonny, you're too young. Come back when you're 18." He did. He volunteered that day he turned 18. He was almost killed 2 years later. He comes back from the war. He goes to Texas. He makes a fortune. He then goes into politics. And then he becomes a supreme diplomat. He learns the world. And then he becomes the CIA director, and he becomes our ambassador to the UN and our first CIA, or rather our liaison to China for the United States, and then Ronald Reagan's two-term vice president. He probably had the greatest resume of any person to become president of the United States. So how lucky we were to have him in the late 1980s and early 90s when those volcanic, convulsive events did change the world. And in fact, hundreds of millions of people were freed in Eastern Europe, and Bush knew precisely what to do.
Yeah, he did not, as he said, want to dance on the Berlin Wall when he was urged to by aides. He was humble. He had this graciousness and this sense of reserve. You brought back something that's really unique. A Japanese of his comrade. He's plucked out of the water by the fin back. I mean, look, JFK, we know that legendary story about PT-109. This is as if not more dramatic. And they got that video. There's the film of him being plucked off onto the submarine, but he didn't really make, you know, a big major deal about that. It's not as legendary as, let's say, JFK's wartime story was.
Bush hated to brag. His mother had instilled in him a legendary modesty. Bush loved baseball.
That's it right there, by the way. We're just watching him being pulled out of the water. There's the rescue.
Yes.
Totally amazing.
But at 8 or 9 years old, Bush had hit 2 home runs as a kid. And he went home and he told his mother, Dorothy. And Dorothy says, referencing that great words of the Protestant hymn, she said, "Now, George, none of that how great thou art business," bringing him down to earth. And Bush never bragged again. And he never would brag about his war record. And he would insist with aides that they didn't brag about his war record. But he was a great war hero and recognized as such. And in fact, Eric, years later, this is the reason that he began as a former president to skydive. He began skydiving in his 70s and skydove every 5th year until age 90 because he was honoring, he said, the 2 crewmates in his plane, which went down in 1944, that died. He almost died, but he blamed himself unfairly until the final day of his life for the fact that they died and he did not. That's the reason that he skydove.
Just so meaningful. And quickly, just mentioned baseball. There's that photo of him with Babe Ruth. Tell us about the first time you met him in the Oval Office. What did he say?
Well, Bush, this was the very first meeting that the writers had with Bush in early 1989. And the president, knowing, I think, that I had written already several books on baseball, looked at me and he said, "You know, I'd rather quote Yogi Berra than Thomas Jefferson," which was great with me until I learned that Bush knew more Berra-isms than I did. And he did, using them quite often with great effect.
A remarkable man who has left a remarkable legacy and a remarkable family. Curt Smith, thank you for joining us with your remembrances.
Thank you. You bet.
Barthel.
The U.S. and China pumping the brakes on their trade dispute, agreeing to a 90-day truce. Now, this after President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping met for a high-stakes dinner at the G20. The temporary ceasefire spelling relief for investors and lawmakers.
People like me who've really been concerned about the president's stated trade policy can take some encouragement about what happened in the last couple of days.
Ellison Barber is live from the White House now with more. Hi, Ellison.
Hi, Arthel. Yeah, this is a ceasefire with a time limit. As you said, the White House says that the two parties, the two countries, will try and reach an agreement within 90 days. President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping, both, according to the White House, said that this meeting in Buenos Aires was what they considered to be a highly successful one. In a statement, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said that President Trump agreed that starting January 1st of 2019, he will leave the tariffs on $200 billion worth of product at the 10% rate and not raise it to 25% at this point in time. She also said that China will agree to purchase a not yet agreed upon amount of agriculture, energy, industrial, and other product from the United States. Sanders then went on to say President Trump and President Xi have agreed to immediately begin negotiations on structural changes with respect to forced technology transfers, intellectual property protection, non-tariff barriers, cyber intrusions, and cyber theft. Services and agriculture, both parties agree that they will endeavor to have this transaction completed within the next 90 days. If at the end of this period of time the parties are unable to reach an agreement, the 10% tariffs will be raised to 25%.
They've had a history, decades of cheating on trade rules. So the whole point of tariffs is that tariffs are a temporary tool to reach a negotiation and to make change with Chinese-U.S. relationships and what we're doing with trade policy. I'm hopeful. It's not clear to me yet that the president's done this right.
Everything the president has promised, he's delivered on, and these are going to be helpful to the economy and people at home.
The White House also says that China agreed to designate fentanyl as a controlled substance. They called that a wonderful humanitarian gesture. In the past, Arthel, President Trump has expressed concern about fentanyl, that substance coming from China to the United States. Arthel.
All right, Ellison Barber, thank you very much for that wrap up. And for more on this now, we're going to bring in Gordon Chang. He's an Asia analyst and the author of The Coming Collapse of China. Gordon, always good to have you. We have a lot to cover. But first, if I could, I want to get your overview. Is this the right move? Is this a good deal for the U.S. Or more of a win for the president, or merely a sly move by China?
Yeah, if anyone won yesterday, I think it was the Chinese. And the reason is that this is a truce, as you pointed out, but the Chinese on March 1st, when this deal ends, will have more leverage than the United States. The Chinese economy right now is really fragile. The Chinese wanted to get through the next couple months. And also, during this 90-day period, the Chinese are going to be continuing to steal U.S. intellectual property, really without the added costs. So I'm concerned about this. Now, we have overwhelming leverage over Beijing, so I'm not that concerned. But nonetheless, this was not a good day for us.
So, okay, so for the next 90 days, both sides are going to discuss China's forced technology transfer. Ellison just reported on this, the cyber intrusion, cyber theft, intellectual property protection. This is all prickly stuff. So how might those discussions go, Gordon, and what will it take to seal the deal?
Well, this will be very difficult because what we want, and what we want is absolutely correct, is we want the Chinese to make structural changes to not only their economy, but effectively their political system as well, because this is a state-dominated system. Xi Jinping is driving China back to a sort of a Maoist-type economy, certainly a Stalinist-type economy. And so this is going to be very, very hard for Xi Jinping. I don't think we can do that in 90 days. You know, we had this 100-day action plan after the Mar-a-Lago meeting last April between Xi Jinping and President Trump, and that completely fell apart. And if that's a template for what's going to happen this time, then we're certainly in trouble. And one other thing, Arthel, and that is, you know, this is a very important time for U.S. manufacturers because during the January and February period, they make decisions, for instance, for the next year, and they'll make 90% of their commitments. Where those manufacturers are based, whether in China or elsewhere, is critical to us. And so we've got to make sure that we disentangle these supply chains from China because we don't really have an effective remedy if they're still in Beijing's control.
Well, that's a lot that you just threw out there. But what could cause even this temporary deal to collapse? And if the deal is inked, how will we know if China is living up to its end of the bargain?
Well, we'll only know that at the end of 90 days because there's really no agreement. There's no joint statement. And that is a little bit disappointing because we have our version of what was agreed. And the Chinese have their version, and they don't necessarily overlap.
Well, I want to move on to something that another thing the president talked to with the reporters on Air Force One on his way back from Argentina. He was asked about the possibility of a second summit with Kim Jong-un. And the president said that I think we're going to do one fairly, into January, February. I think we're getting along very well, he added. We have a good relationship with Kim. So also, Gordon, according to reports, the U.S. won't require Kim Jong-un to give a complete list of his nuclear weapons and locations before the second meeting. But he has to submit a concrete plan at the second meeting, should it happen. Is this the right order?
Well, I hope that it is. But, after the June summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un in Singapore, the North Koreans have been stalling, they've been delaying, they've been moving backwards. President Trump very generously has led up the pressure, hoping to create this atmosphere where Kim will feel secure enough to give up his weapons. As President Trump said, he's giving him a one-shot time to do the right thing. Kim hasn't done the right thing, so the question is, what is the second summit actually going to accomplish?
Right, and should the president even do it? What do you think? Should he do that?
No, I don't think that he should. The Trump administration says there's a lot of progress that's occurring in the background, but we don't really see evidence of that. And a summit is going to be very beneficial for Kim Jong-un. Also, it's going to help Moon Jae-in, the South Korean president, undermine our policies. So if there's going to be a summit, well, because Moon is deeply anti-American, he's trying to create he's trying to get these sanctions lifted. He's trying to show everyone that South Korea and North Korea can work together. And so this undermines our ability to maintain maximum pressure. So this is not a good story for us. And so I would hope that if there is this second summit in January and February, as the president said, that we actually get a concrete plan from the North Koreans to give up their weapons, and that plan is verifiable, and that it contemplates the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
And then the question will be, will China help put pressure on Kim Jong-un? We have to leave it there. Gordon Chang, as you know, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Arthel.
Well, severe weather is ripping through the Midwest this weekend. At least a dozen tornadoes have touched down in at least one state. And today, millions of Americans were told are under threat again. We will have the latest forecast on what to expect in a moment. And what's next for the Mueller investigation after Michael Cohen pled guilty to lying? And what is all the lying about? We'll take a look in depth as Fox News Channel continues for this Sunday.
Major developments in the Mueller investigation. President Trump's lead attorney, Rudy Giuliani, slamming the special counsel after Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, pled guilty to lying to Congress. Giuliani accusing Mueller of crossing the line and using, quote, unethical tactics. Molly Hindenburg is live in Washington with new details. Hi, Molly.
Hi, Arthel. Roger Stone, the Republican operative who may be next on special counsel Robert Mueller's list, says today that he was not a conduit between WikiLeaks, with its collection of hacked Hillary Clinton emails, and the Trump campaign. Stone says he had gotten some information about a dump of damaging emails regarding the Clinton Foundation that could be coming during the 2016 presidential election, but that he had never spoken with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange or relayed information from WikiLeaks to Trump.
I engaged in politics. My purpose was to take a tip, which I thought to be solid, and then after that, to follow the WikiLeaks Twitter feed and set a Google News alert for Julian Assange, and use Twitter to hype as much voter and media attention to the disclosures when they came as politics. You were in this business once. That's called politics.
Meanwhile, special counsel Mueller, his team, is expected to reveal this week what they say are lies by former Trump campaign advisor Paul Manafort after Manafort pled guilty in September to financial fraud. Investigators say he broke his plea deal and may face more charges. Manafort's lawyers dispute that. They say he did not lie. The incoming top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee says investigators are looking beyond Manafort.
It means that Paul Manafort was double dealing. Basically, he was going through the pretense of cooperating, but he was really, in an underhanded way, supplying information to the Trump legal defense team. And of course, the president continues to dangle a pardon for Paul Manafort, which only adds to the growing body of evidence that the president is engaged in obstructing justice. That, I think, is the ultimate significance here.
President Trump has said that Mueller's team has treated Manafort, quote, so poorly, and that he hasn't taken anything, such as a pardon, off the table. One last note, after fighting a subpoena, former FBI Director James Comey will testify before the House Judiciary Committee on Tuesday regarding his decisions leading up to the 2016 election. Comey agreed to testify in private as long as a transcript was released within 24 hours. Arthel?
Molly Hindenburg, thank you very much, Molly. Eric?
And for more on this, let's bring in Robert Bianchi. He's a criminal defense and trial attorney, also the former head county prosecutor in New Jersey. Robert, so we've got the breaking news about Jim Comey will testify. How significant is that?
Well, I think that they came to a resolution because, typically speaking, a court is not going to get involved in Congress's business. It's called the political question doctrine. In other words, Congress has a right to conduct its business so long as it sees fit. And this judge basically said, Eric, you're not saying that the inquiry is inappropriate. And what authority do I have to get in the middle of what Congress does? Now, here it seems like they struck a compromise. Comey was worried about the fact that it's going to be leaked and only portions of his statements are going to come out, and that there's been manipulations and deceptions. But apparently the Republicans have agreed with him that within 24 hours after you testify, you can release the transcript and you can speak to the media. So it kind of ameliorates or lessens the concerns that Comey's team had.
What do you think his defense will be? What do you think he would say in the way he dealt with this investigation?
I think he's going to say he dealt with the investigation appropriately. Now, I commented a lot on the Hillary Clinton email scandal, and what people tend to do is they look at these things from the prism of politics as opposed to the law. And even though you may trip over a law and do something that is not necessarily correct, does not mean with prosecutorial discretion they're going to go after you for a mistake like that. They want to be able to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt with corroborating evidence. So when Comey gave his statement, it was almost like a hit I think I may have done with you or somebody else on Fox News to say, this is exactly where this is going to come down, and it's exactly what Comey did. There was nothing unusual about his reasoning. Him giving the statement, that's another issue.
So, yeah, do you think they're going to try to really pick apart his reasoning for giving Hillary Clinton a pass and not prosecuting her?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're going to say that he was skewed. Now, remember, at the time, everybody was very elated by Mr. Comey from the Republican side and from the Trump campaign because he went out and gave that unbelievable statement that I think was inappropriate. That was something that should have been left with the Attorney General, not the person that's doing the investigation. Nevertheless, they're going to look into the things that you missed, the things that you did not take into consideration, and they're going to try to make an argument that he tried to whitewash, if you will, this investigation. And, of course, looming in the background, and on both sides, they're equal opportunity problems, is this tarmac meeting with Loretta Lynch and Clinton that just led a really bad taste in people's mouths as to whether or not the integrity of the investigation was appropriate.
Meanwhile, you've got Michael Cohen apparently lying again or admitting to that, and then you've got Manafort, the prosecutors accusing him of lying. I mean, what are they lying about? You got the Trump Tower project apparently in development in Moscow during the campaign. President says there's nothing wrong with that. Do you think there is? And what could be behind all this? Was it part of trying to get sanctions off the VEB bank, that Russian bank, and they didn't want anybody to know?
I think it could be that. It could also be political. But there were certain things that were going on during the course of that deal that could implicate crimes with regard to operating with a sanctioned bank. And as well, after you get elected, but before you're sworn in, dealing with the Russians with regard to policy issues. And watch Flynn on this because it's been deadly silent. And that's one of those. Yes. That's one of those things you got to. It hasn't been sentenced. Yeah. And he's been silent. And he knows a lot about the internal workings between America and Russia.
So what do you think in terms of Flynn, that he is someone, as you point out, who we've not heard really anything from?
Right. So I think that he's important in that capacity. Eric, just like the Clinton email scandal, if they cannot make a strong, solid connection beyond the information they're getting from Michael Cohen. In other words, remember, with the Trump Tower meeting, they found emails that suggested that this was about the Magnitsky Act and getting that removed, and that they're getting dirt for Hillary Clinton. Same thing with regard to all these other issues. There seems to be people lying about it, and then there's proof that shows that what they said was not accurate. Now, the question becomes, that doesn't necessarily establish a link of collusion. But when you're dealing with the Trump Tower meeting and you're dealing with this issue with Corsi and Stone with regard to their involvement with WikiLeaks and Assange, that starts to ratchet up prosecutors thinking, cover up a crime.
Stone, of course, just said today that, he didn't have any contact with him, but people are lying.
And there have been contradictory statements he's made about that.
Yes, yeah, we'll have to see. Bob, good to see you.
You got it, Eric.
As always. Arthel?
Eric, thank you. Well, tensions escalating between the U.S. and Iran after Tehran test-fired a missile. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says that missile is capable of carrying multiple warheads. How both the U.S. and the United Nations are responding. Plus, a deeper look at the 41st President of the United States, George H.W. Bush, revealing his own thoughts and feelings through the audio diary he kept while in the White House. We'll hear some of those excerpts as our nation remembers an American patriot and leader.
Nation mourns the death of former President George Herbert Walker Bush this weekend. His foundation is offering a closer, in-depth look at the late president's life with excerpts from his audio diary. You know, he recorded his own thoughts and feelings while he was in the White House. How about that? Jackie Heinrich, live in our New York City newsroom with more on this fascinating insight. Hi, Jackie.
Good morning. Good morning, Eric. The new video that was released is a series from President Bush's foundation. It will detail the 41st president's life from his very own perspective, and viewers will hear the messages that he left for his loved ones to hold on to after his passing. President Bush narrates his own story, drawing on the diary he kept for 57 years. The memories he talks about are illustrated with videos about Port Maine compound. His thoughts on getting older, wrestling with the melancholy, the end of the life he so loved, and accepting his own mortality.
And I want to be there for you if you get a bad bounce in life, and no doubt you will, for the seas do indeed get rough. When I say be there, I mean in the game, in the lineup, viscerally involved in your lives, even though I might be miles away.
A tweet from his son, Jeb Bush, also reveals there will be more of these videos to come. He tweeted, "We'll be releasing a video series with excerpts from his diary and letters based from September 1998, hashtag Remembering 41. The book, released in 2014, reveals letters and writings from the president dating from 1941 to 2010. The story is told largely through personal letters, including one to the president's then-fiancée, Barbara, written in 1943 when he was serving in the U.S. Navy in World War II. There's also a letter written to his parents. While some are lighthearted and some are somber, the book touches on Bush's time as a member of Congress, an ambassador, director of the CIA, vice president, and president. And the letters to his children are especially poignant and honest, revealing his innermost thoughts on being a father and a husband. The first video diary clip ends with President Bush's sign-off, "Devotedly Dad," dedicating that project to his children. Eric?
What a special gift for all of us. Jackie, thank you.
In parts of Europe and all of the Middle East, this stoking new tension between Washington and Tehran. Now, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo did say the missile is capable of carrying multiple warheads. Pompeo added in a statement that such a test is a violation of UN Security Council Resolution 2231. Western intelligence sources did confirm to Fox News that the test occurred over the weekend and that the missile is the same version Iran displayed during a military parade in September of this year. The test comes just days after U.S. Representative for Iran, Brian Hook, released evidence of Iran's growing ballistic program.
Today, the United States is unveiling new evidence of Iran's ongoing missile proliferation. The Iranian threat is growing, and we are accumulating risk of escalation in the region if we fail to act.
Today, a spokesperson for the Iranian Foreign Ministry said in a statement that this missile test did not violate any UN resolutions and that it was defensive in nature. The new actions by Iran come after the Trump administration reimposed sanctions on the country last month and pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal earlier this year, putting more pressure on Iranian President Hassan Rouhani and the Ayatollah program. The Trump administration, they stand on pushing back against Iranian aggression. Over the weekend, the president's own national security advisor, John Bolton, said that this type of behavior cannot be tolerated. Arthel?
Trey Yingst. Thanks, Trey.
Well, there's some new developments at the border to tell you about how Mexican officials are responding to uncle, Jimmy Hoffa. He gave me the directions to this house, and he described the layout. This is where Sheeran says Hoffa was shot.
Fox News had the answers.
This is the road that Frank Sheeran drove on.
I was around when the Hoffa disappeared that weekend.
I have never believed the Frank Sheeran story.
They have hit a dead end in their part of the Jimmy Hoffa investigation.
Did you think Hoffa was going to get killed?
I felt it in my bones.
You can log in at FoxNation.com. You can listen to the behind-the-scenes interviews on Riddled the Podcast. The podcast available on FoxNewsPodcasts.com. And we're getting an update from the southern border about the poor sanitary conditions that has forced the city of Tijuana to shut down that sports complex that they were using as a shelter for about 6,000 of those Central American migrants. Officials now moving those families to a former concert venue that happens to be further from the border. Meanwhile, there are growing calls for the U.S. and Mexico to work more closely on the asylum process. House Judiciary Chairman Congressman Bob Goodlatte spoke exclusively to Maria Bartiromo this morning on Sunday Morning Futures.
This is not a situation that's any better for Mexico than it is for the United States, so they ought to work together to work it out.
Jeff Paul is live in Tijuana, Mexico for us right now with the very latest. Hi, Jeff.
Yeah, Eric, federales and immigration officers here along the Tijuana border are standing by and watching. They're waiting to see if there will be another march and demonstration similar to the one we saw 1 week ago. Now, despite yesterday of talks of another march, the situation here has been fairly quiet. Most of the movement within the migrant caravan happening last night. That's when officials shut down the original shelter that once housed an estimated 6,000 people. Everyone has been cleared out, and they're now either living on the outside of the street near that old shelter, or they've moved to the newest shelter. It's a much bigger space, and migrants who have made the move say, despite all that's happened, they're trying to stay positive.
We have great hope that things change. We hope and faith in God that nothing bad will happen to us, that everything will turn out well. If ask the new president to help us. We're not here for fun.
Mexico's newest president, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, officially inaugurated yesterday. He's considered a leftist who ran on a platform helping the presidency could impact
George H.W. Bush this weekend, a lifelong leader, dedicated public servant, and family man. House Republicans tangle with Jim Comey over answering questions on Capitol Hill this week, and the U.S. and China strike a temporary truce on trade. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Maria Bartiromo. This is Sunday Morning Futures. Tributes have been pouring in for the 41st President of the United States as our nation prepares to honor George H.W. Bush this week. And we learn new details about the funeral arrangements coming up. We will get reflections from the man President Bush chose as his running mate. Former Vice President Dan Quayle joins me now in an exclusive interview coming up. A judge could decide tomorrow whether James Comey will appear publicly or privately before lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Will House Republicans finally get the answers they've been seeking for nearly 2 years? I'll speak exclusively with House Judiciary Committee Chairman Bob Goodlatte. And President Trump and Xi strike a tentative deal on trade just a day after the American president signed a new trade with the leaders of Mexico and Canada. Will Democrats work with the president in the wake of these negotiations? An incoming member of the House Democratic leadership, Congressman Matt Cartwright, is with me talking about that and the possibility of a partial government shutdown on the horizon as we look ahead right now on Sunday Morning. War hero and 41st President of the United States died on Friday night at the age of 94. He is being remembered as a man of uncommon decency and kindness across the political spectrum this weekend. A loving father and husband who devoted his life to his family and country. Beginning tomorrow, the nation will get to say their final farewells to the former president when he lie in state in the U.S. Capitol before he is laid to rest back home in Texas later this week. Joining me right now in an exclusive interview to share his memories of the late president is Dan Quayle, former Vice President under George H.W. Bush. Mr. Vice President, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
My condolences to you and his family. Share with us what you remember of President H.W.
Well, you said it all. The best. And it was such an honor for me to work with him every single day that he was president, I was vice president, for the American people. And a lot of folks, you know, they ask me, well, what's the legacy? I said, you know, that's a tough question. Historians will sort that out. But in my view, his legacy, Maria, was accomplishments. He got things done. When he left office, the economy was growing at 5–6%. You know, the Berlin Wall came down. Eastern and Central Europe freed from the of communism. Apartheid in South Africa was eliminated. To Iraq, North time, and the rest of Africa was eliminated. Success in putting Saddam Hussein back into Iraq, Noriega apprehended. So many things in a short period of time, and the domestic front as well. So accomplishments. He did so much in 4 years.
He really did. He left the country in a better place than when he arrived. And when he first chose you as his running mate, you wrote an op-ed in the Journal. George Bush, Be Prepared and Be Loyal was the title of that. You talked about after yourself and the president were inaugurated on January 20th, 1989, and he discussed Ronald Reagan a bit to you. As Ronald Reagan left, why did you choose those words, be prepared and loyal? He said that to you.
He did. We talked about, you know, what the Quayle model would be. I said, look, I very much like the Bush model. And he says, no, you have your own model. You'll do your thing. It'll be different than mine. I was very, very fortunate to not only work with him as a great individual, but he had been vice president for 8 years. And he knew the good things about being vice president and the not so good things about being vice president. So that was a blessing from my perspective. But what he said to me on the steps of the Capitol as we said goodbye to Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan, he turned to me and in sort of his, you know, low voice, he says, that man was very good to me. And I can say that today. That man, George Bush, was very good to me.
Oh, how wonderful. And you were just 41 years old when you first were in the job, but you had been in Congress for a long time, since you were 29, so you had a great perspective in terms of the congressional dealings. How did President Bush deal with the Congress in terms of the different factions and determinations on each sides of the aisle?
Well, it's interesting because we had a Democrat Congress. So, you know, we had to deal with Speaker Foley. We had to deal with Majority Leader George Mitchell. So we had to reach across the aisle to get support for what we wanted to do. And look at what we did. You know, we got budgets passed, clean air, comprehensive clean air legislation, disabilities. And then the resolution from the Congress, and particularly in the Senate, the House was easy to go and take Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait and put him back into Iraq, because we had to pick up 10 Democrats in the United States Senate to support us to get a majority vote. And we had the Majority Leader, George Mitchell, was opposed to us. We had the Chairman of the Senate Armed Services, Sam Nunn, was opposed to us. We had a lot of very important people in the Senate that were opposed to us on this resolution. And so we had to work hard to get Democrats to support us. And, you know, sometimes divided government works. It clearly worked in our administration, and you can get things done if you reach across the aisle and work hard.
And even on a personal level, he did things without theatrics or drama. President Bush died nearly 7.5 months after his wife of 73 years, Barbara Bush, passed. Not long after his mother's passing, I had the opportunity to talk with President George W. Bush and former First Lady Laura Bush about the bond between the elder Bush couple. Watch this.
I love the fact that she was married to your father for 73 years.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, he was by her side, by the way, when she passed.
He said that.
Which is sweet, yeah.
And we have a love letter that he wrote to her that we have been talking about this morning from World War II in 1943, penned by your father, and it's going viral this morning, obviously. And it says, it reads in part, "This may sound melodramatic, but if it does, it is only my inadequacy to say what I mean. Bar, you have made my life full of everything I could ever dream of. My complete happiness should be a token of my love for you." Were they just sort of just like a love affair all the time? I mean, in
it seemed that way, you know.
They really were.
Yeah,
it was a great example.
They were best friends, weren't they, Mr. Vice President? Did you see that as well?
Yeah, so actually one of the last times that I saw the president and Barbara together was 2 years ago up at Kennebunkport. I used to go up there every summer and have a lunch with them. And they serve a great lobster and they have a little white wine. It's a wonderful lunch, just the three of us. And the last time I was there, you know, Barbara was carrying on the conversation. The president would chime in when he wanted to, but you could just see the love and the sparkle.